Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lord Michael Hastings, Chancellor, Regent's University, London, and Shameel Joosub, Chief Executive Officer, Vodacom Group, Vodacom.
Well, good afternoon and good evening to those in Shameel in South Africa and those from Vodafone in London who are watching as well, and good morning to anyone else who is watching us on live at this moment. So we're going to have a conversation about the nature of philanthropy and aid for Africa. Yesterday in London, in combination with the UN General Assembly, Vodafone, Vodacom, and Safaricom published a report. Here it is: Barriers to African Civil Society, Building the Sector's Capacity and Potential to Scale Up. A hugely significant piece of work over the course of the last year in recognition of what has been 30 years of the business and 30 years of the foundation work associated with the business. So shortly I'm going to have a conversation with Shameel Joosub, who runs Vodacom in South Africa and has oversight of Vodacom's activities for the whole of Africa. But also, before we do that, we have a short video from a remarkable lady, Degan Ali, who has spent decades as a Somalian living in Kenya, championing, campaigning for dignity and human rights, and fighting the cause of those who are often left behind. Just a few minutes from Degan. She said this to us today and recorded, sent it over. Let's have a look at the video.
Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning for all of you all over the world. Thank you, Concordia, for inviting me to this important event, and I'm sorry I couldn't be with you today. I'm here to talk about just some few ideas on how to make some structural and mindset shifts to decolonize development and aid. And let me start off first and foremost by the premise that aid and development assistance is really a band-aid solution to poverty alleviation, that it's not intended and designed for real poverty alleviation. And if we are genuinely interested in making that happen, we need to look at the global governance institutions and the global financial and economic institutions that exist that ensure hegemony and control of former colonizers of the colonized. With that in mind, the first recommendation is that we need to transform the global governance system, and particularly the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organizations, the World Trade Organization and the UN Security Council veto power, the P5 veto power. These are really critical institutions that are impacting the sovereignty and the development of former colonies. It's particularly when we talk about development and economic development in the global South, many of these countries don't need aid. What they need is a level playing field to play the game. They need fair rules of the game, and currently the rules are not fair. They're not in favor of both sides winning. They're in favor of one side winning, and that is the global North side. So we need equal voting power in these global governance institutions, one country, one vote. We need trade rules that are in favor of all, and particularly global South institutions, former colonies. We need the shackles of former colonization to be removed, financial and economic shackles to be removed from the global South. That's number one. That's if we are serious about transforming and ensuring that aid and development assistance is no longer needed and these countries are able to thrive on their own. Number two, I would say, is that we need unconditional debt relief with no strings attached. If we're really genuinely meaning to shift power, then we need to uplift the voice and capacity of global South civil society and invest in these institutions to be resilient. So if you think about the three pillars in every country that support the development of every country: strong governments, strong private sector, and of course the public sector is the third pillar, and that includes civil society. We're not very relevant in the lives of most global South countries. Somalia, for instance, has been a fragile state, and in the past 30 years, maybe in an active civil war for about 20, 25 of those years. And I would say that the survival of Somali people is not as a result of the aid that has been done, it's as a result of the Somalis themselves, particularly the social support system that has helped them, particularly remittances, that has been far, far exceeded any aid that has been invested. And I'm sure, sorry to say, much of the aid has been put into the wrong things, diverted, misused, abused by many actors. So I would not, the last group on my list to laud for any kind of survival of Somalia and the Somali people is the aid community. I would first and foremost recognize the resilience, ingenuity, and social support of Somali culture and Somali people. And so this is just one example out of many all over the global South. And so we need to appreciate and this capacity, this resilience in these countries, and not assume that we're here to save them and they have nothing.
Well, powerful words, strong thoughts. For the last year, I've been chairing this special project for Vodafone of the Vodafone Foundation. So, Shameel, as you heard there, Degan is talking specifically about Somalia, but more generally about how aid is handled to CSOs, or what we might call non-governmental organizations, charities, foundations across the continent. How do you see it from South Africa?
Thanks, Lord Hastings, and thank you for having a chat with for having me on the show, on the for the invitation. I think, you know, when we look at Africa in general, I think one of the big things when it comes to MPO or CSO funding is really to ensure that first and foremost, it's got to be sustainable funding. And so when donors are looking to put money in, it's imperative that it's sustainable, because these once-off donations don't necessarily, they provide some relief, but they don't necessarily help to capacitate that organization properly. Secondly, it's ensuring that that proper capacity and leadership has been built into those NPOs, and that's a very important part of being able to achieve it. And then I would say the third one being establishing process and governance and training, so that you create a sustainable organization. So what we like to do is to make sure that the organizations that we fund on a multi-year basis, many, you know, for 15, 20 years. And then you can see the skill set growing, you can see the professionalization of that of those NPOs get better and better. And then of course there's the use of technology as well, and how technology can help with both the governance processes, but also making those NPOs a lot more efficient and effective. And then lastly, I would say partnering with local players in the market. So an example, what we do is because of the need that's, you know, in many of our territories is so large, what we try and do is focus on specific items or specific areas, but then also we would partner with, for instance, the Vodafone Foundation, which would then provide funding to us. But by having the local feet on the ground, so to say, you know, that relationship works a lot better, because we can ensure the governance, the processes, and so on are in place to make sure those NPOs are successful. And then, of course, integrating them with our employees as well, and making sure that our employees are fully engaged with the MPOs as well in transference of skills. So, you know, it's this almost an ecosystem that you need to create to ensure the success.
At the heart of this report, as you know, Shameel, is the analysis that Western organizations, say Northern European, American organizations, when they gift resources to sub-Saharan Africa, they keep a huge amount of it effectively themselves for administration and process and reporting. Are you seeing any transformation in how support is given? I mean, you're doing it yourself as Vodacom and Vodafone, but are you seeing it across South Africa? Are the Western organizations changing, or are they stuck in the old model where, as Degan called it, they're still being colonial?
To be honest, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. You've got some very progressive ones, and then you've got some that are still stuck in the old world, unfortunately.
And how do you believe that an organization, a company like Vodafone, Vodacom, can help the aid givers to trust the receivers? You talked about building long-term capacity, you talked about IT. What else is necessary to build the trust and confidence of the aid givers?
Well, I think from the aid givers perspective, I think if you've got proper organizations that you're funding over a long period of time, then there's a lot more credibility that comes with it. So I think sustainable funding is extremely important. But the funding, if you over prescribe what the funding is going to be used for, then it doesn't also go towards creating the capacity within those NPOs which can create the success. So you have to make sure that when you're going to fund an organization, that you're also making sure that you're funding the leadership, the systems, the processes, and so on. And that will then give, will lend a hand to the NPOs on the one side to create more sustainability, but will also at the same point give the aid givers a lot more confidence in the organizations that they're funding.
Because you talked in your remarks a few minutes ago about how you've gone for long-term sustainable funding and how therefore you've been able to build up leadership capacity, technical understanding, IT strength. And that long-term approach is really, in many ways, the opposite of what a lot of the donors like to do. They like short-term project money.
Yeah, and I just think that's not sustainable, because what happens to that MPO after that short-term funding? So example would be if you're funding an orphanage, what happens to the kids when that funding stops? You're now going to transfer them to another home because the home can't sustain itself, and that causes a lot of wastage in the system, if you like. Whereas if you create a more sustainable program, I think that helps a lot. And of course, organizations like ourselves can also help. And what we're doing is to make sure that we're training people, where we have a special program called Change the World. And we take people from the public and actually send them to go and work in the MPOs and help them build up the governance. But also we get volunteer ICT volunteers and send them to the NPOs to help them as well. And we've seen that has created a big transformation as well.
So the companies like yourself, almost the way you plant in your skilled IT people into NPOs, into charities, into organizations, and they help to drive the reform. That's a significant commitment and gift of time, but also money, isn't it?
It is, but that's what's going to make a difference. And I think if you want to move if you want to make a difference to the MPOs, you've got to create these type of sustainable programs, and also understand where the weaknesses lie, which is in things like where technology can help, where systems and processes can help them, which then gives them the ability to attract more funding.
One of the comments that the report draws out, as I think you know as well, Shameel, is that maybe has the time come, Degan referred to it in her remarks, has the time come where Africa's own millionaires, billionaires, foundation leaders take over the role of supporting MPOs, CSOs from Western agencies? Has that time come? Do you think the change is possible?
Well, I think it's incumbent on all companies and billionaires, millionaires, and so on to give back to society and to do as much as they can to assist. However, I do believe that the problem is quite large, especially in you know, in a lot of the rural areas in the country, whether it's South Africa or in any of our entities across Africa. So the need is large. But there's also a different model, which is partnering, where, you know, you can have local companies such as ourselves, you know, drawing funding like we do with Vodafone. So an example would be our M-Mama project, you know, where we make it possible for pregnant mom to reach the hospital, and we pay for the transport and so on, to ensure, you know, proper maternal births and so on. Now, in that way, we partner with Vodafone. So they provide us with funding, but at the same time, we're able to manage it on the ground. And I think bringing the two together actually could be a sustainable model where you get companies on the ground that are also being funded from Western organizations, and the two could be very powerful.
So you're really setting a new pace where you have local, yourselves locally there in South Africa as Vodacom, and you've got Vodafone, the global company, also in partnership, aiding people directly to make sure women get to hospital safely, give birth safely. Does that encourage you to think, in the light of this report, which is also saying, if Vodafone, Vodacom, Safaricom change how you do community support, can you get other foundations to do the same? Do you think other companies will do the same?
Yes, and I think that's really the hope. You know, the more we can encourage to do the same, I think the better the benefit of that will flow into society. And that's why, you know, we're making moves like providing ICT skills beyond our NPOs and so on, and expertise, so that they can deepen the skills and also provide and encourage other organizations to do the same.
I don't know whether you've seen in this week's Economist newspaper magazine a report about how the Gates Foundation does its philanthropy. And one of the interesting things in that report, very briefly, is that so much is required on reporting that it means a large proportion of the money allocated for philanthropy effectively stays in headquarters, assessing where the little bits of money have gotten to. Is this need for constant assessment necessary now? Can we change this model?
I think that model can definitely be changed. Capacitate the receiving NPO properly. Then you need less governance. Then the money can reach those foundations and actually touch the lives of those people that need it most. If you're going to govern the thing from the center or from Europe, it's not going to help. Rather create the capacity at the organization, make sure that you put the processes in place, and it's a small investment. Then you don't have to regulate or keep where the money stays at the center, because you try to control it from the center.
I mean, clearly we need donors to be willing to change their expectations, how they allocate resources. You've emphasized strongly sustainable long-term resourcing. You've emphasized building up capacity, technology input, the gifting of people to be able to do the kind of technical support. But there's also the final area, which is trust and confidence in those at the front line. And that's a choice, isn't it, that you as a company have had to make, that you trust the people at the front line to deliver the work. We've just got less than a minute, but what's your reflection on that?
Yeah, I think that's extremely important. And once you've capacitated it properly, and then that comes, immediately you can trust the people that are in there. And then, of course, the integration of those people with your employees as well also builds a lot of trust, and also plays back into your own employee understanding the good that you're doing, and that you're actually living your purpose. And that goes a long way.
Well, Shameel, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's late for you in South Africa, and for those watching in London too, but thank you so much, Shameel. Thank you to Vodacom and Safaricom from the sub-Saharan continent of Africa. Thank you to Vodafone. And for this special report, please do download it, access it join the debate about how to build trust and confidence in the future of aid in Africa. Bye-bye.